Good afternoon. We are going to call the regular meeting of the Hood River White Salmon Bridge Authority to order at 2:01 p.m. Let the record show we do have a quorum now. Thank you very much. For modifications and additions to the agenda, I would ask that we move under new business, a public hearing to take public testimony on the progressive design build exemption, as well as adding ODOT bridge loan to our new business, removing our consent agenda items. Is there any other changes?
Yeah, I've a very simple one. I'd like to have a very brief discussion on calendar.
Okay, and the addition of calendar under new business. Okay, anything else from any of the commissioners or staff to be added to the agenda? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved.
There is a motion and a second to approve the agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Do we need to take roll?
No, Chair.
Sorry, did you guys do roll in the room without the microphone on?
We have a quorum, but I figured staff was going to take the roll off of it. So did it for the minutes.
Okay,
All right. Next up, we will move into the co-chair's report for this meeting. We have had, this will be hopefully a short meeting. We'll see with our public hearing. But we've had a little bit of discussion about going from every 2 weeks to once a month now that all of the subcommittees are getting started and having multiple meetings a month. So we're going to see how that goes probably this next month. But right now, we're going to continue with every 2 weeks. But we'll try to make some changes as we move along. That's mine. Commissioner Fox.
Nothing additional to report at this time.
All right. Project update. Hey, don't forget to press your button.
All right, well, we're working on a couple things on government affairs. We have the scheduled DC interim in district congressional members are coming out on the 31st. We have confirmation of 4 of them. We're working with the lobbyists from Oregon and Washington to see what state representatives we can get to come out. So we'll let you know on that. And then if you have not let us know if you can attend, please email me back and let me know if you can make that that day. It's October 31st from 10 to 2. We are planning to start here in White Salmon, go down and do a in-water tour, weather permitting, and then come back over to everybody's for an afternoon lunch with the group. So funding and finance, we're putting together the BIP application, which is the Bridge Investment Program. The NOFO come out September 27th with a due date of November 27th. We do have a question into FHWA on that about a new model that they released for the BCA and how we are to include some updated information related to some ratings on the bridge. One of the substructure numbers went from a 5 to a 4, which changes us to a poor. So we're waiting to see how they want us to incorporate that into our BCA. It will have an impact on our BCA and move it up. But we wanted to get clarification from them to make sure we're capturing it correctly.
Yeah, just to clarify, this change would actually improve our ranking that supports us better.
Yeah, that's correct. So we'll give you a summary once we find out from them exactly how they want us to incorporate it. We'll give you an update on how it impacted the BCA. It will be a positive to the project, and we'll let you know. The TIFIA letter of interest is being developed and we're planning to submit that in early November. The Treaty Tribe MOAs, we're working through that. Yakima Nation, the feds lawyers are working with the Yakima lawyers to get some information over. Same with Nez Pierce. We're waiting on a email from the Nez Pierce lawyers with their modifications to the MOA. We have a meeting tomorrow with Umatilla. So we'll be going over how to advance their treaty MOA. Hopefully that will progress. And then Warm Springs, we're still looking to set up another meeting with them. So 3 of them are progressing. Warm Springs, we're just waiting for another meeting. So, but we are making overall progress. The RFP, we got our industry review back. We're working through those comments and edits. The official RFP will go out October 31st. So we are putting calendar holds on the evaluation committee members for training and scoring and evaluating interviews, getting all those holds on people's calendars. So that is still progressing and will go out again on October 31st. And that is it for my update.
Okay, we are gonna go back one section and open the meeting for public comment. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per individual, and you are welcome to comment on anything bridge related so long as it is not on the exemption and use of the progressive design build, as we will be holding a public hearing for that very shortly. Is there any public comment in the room? I am not seeing any. Is there any public comment online? If you would like to provide public comment, please raise your hand. Turn your video on, *6 to unmute yourself if you're on your phone. I am not seeing any public comment. Okay, we are going to close public comment and move on to our legal report. Judy and Mark.
Sorry, let me get myself unmuted here. This is Mark. We are working on the format of our report, which we intend to give at the first meeting of each month, but we have not yet resolved the format of our reporting. And so we would like to postpone this month's report to the next meeting.
Mark, would you like it to be at our next month's meeting or just the second meeting of the month?
The second meeting of this month we'll have our format nailed down by then. So our apologies for the backup. We've been working on a lot of material.
That is no problem. Thank you for the update, Mike. Okay, next we will move into our committee reports. And Grant is not available. Is there anyone from Funding and Finance that is here that can give have you guys had a chance to meet?
So they have set up their meetings. It's going to be the 3rd Wednesday of the month from 3 to 4. They are actually all at the IBTTA conference right now. And then the updates are generally what I gave for the BIP application and the NOFO. So. I'm sorry, International Bridge, Tunnel and Tolling Association. Sorry, thank you.
That's the one up in Seattle, right? Yep. Okay, engineering and construction update.
Yeah, we now scheduled our formal meetings, and we'll be meeting every 2 weeks on Thursdays. What I'd like to do is turn the mic over to both Catherine and Eric and give a brief on what's happened in the first couple of meetings.
So we went through the RFP and went through our comments and felt that the RFP was maybe missing some of our own internal goals. So to be really clear, we as a committee wanted to ensure that safety, collaboration, efficiency, and urgency and innovation was just clearly spelled out as the goal of the project for our own committee as well. And then making sure that's tied into the RFP throughout to make sure that the potential bidders will know that that's really where we're focusing our efforts on is how can you prove that you will be safe? How can you prove that you will collaborate? How can you prove that you'll be efficient, and how can you prove that you'll be innovative? So we're really excited to receive answers to that and the questions, and then tying those, you know, those pillars, if you will, into our own interview and how we'll be taking the interview. So it gives us a direction, and we're able to really be on the same page, even though the three of us come from pretty extensively different backgrounds, which is fun. And that's all my section of the brief.
Thanks, Catherine. One of the other things that is a topic that's come up a couple times in the first meeting is having some idea of responsibilities and authorities as the different committees go forward. So we've gone ahead and Mike actually took a shot at those. We had a pretty good discussion on them last week and a little bit this week, and we're going to continue to fine tune those. I think what we'd like to see is maybe our next meeting carve out a little time to actually discuss those. I think as we've gone through our thinking is maybe it would be good to have a set of those so that we all kind of understand within the committees and the bridge authority on its own what we can expect from each other. I think it's going to become pretty clear, relatively short order, but having kind of a basis to start would be helpful. So
kind of adding on to that, I don't know if your mic there, if you would, Eric. This document is called an R2A2, which is roles, responsibilities, accountabilities, and authorities. So the idea there is if you're going to give us the responsibility, we got to have the authority to be able to do what you're asking us to do. So the three of us took a shot at the engineering construction committee, but we also decided in that review that it really needs to have another one, which is the R2A2 for the parent organization, the authority. And then how does that fit with the subcommittee, if you will, on engineering and construction? So we've attempted to do one for the authority just to kind of see how it fits together. And as you said, we'd like to bring it to this body maybe next time for consideration. It may be that the other committees would like to do something similar so they all tie together back, you know, the four committees and the parent organization, but that's just an idea.
it's worth a discussion, I think, amongst the group.
Thank you all for the update. I think we can carve out some time on the next meeting to have that conversation. Okay, governance, administration, and operations, Commissioner Beck.
Sorry about that. A little bit fast there. Fast on the trigger. Yeah, so we've set our meetings for once a month on the first Tuesdays. So we'll start on November 7th. Not a lot to report other than I did a review of the intergovernmental agreement with the port, the discussion about that, reviewed that with our council. They are still refining that, so they gave us a little bit of a preview. I guess all I would say is that there are some details or some intricacies or some complexities, I guess is the word I'm looking for. There's some complexities that I hadn't, that I hoped wouldn't be necessary, but I think they have some good arguments for why, but we'll wait until we get a full report before we have a discussion. That will be before this body, as I understand, by the next meeting. That's it.
Communications, Commissioner Keithley.
Hi, guys. So updates on our end. It's taken us a bit to try to find a consistent meeting date for the three commissioners and the JLA team, but I think we're settling on the second Wednesdays of the month, and our first one will be in November. We're working right now to coordinate a time with Jake E. and Nate to kind of give them an onboarding into comms, since we've been doing a lot of work that was underway as we kind of staged up the authority. And so we kind of want to give them that overview. And at the same time, we've been working on a charter, which makes me think a little bit like it's similar to what the construction engineering teams are working on with an R2A2. So I'm interested for that conversation because maybe we'll shift gears and do that same exercise for comms. And then just a reminder to everyone, you should have received an email if you were at the picnic with a copy of first pass of your edited video and then the print Q&A from the sit down that you did do. And they're hoping to get those pages up for each of the commissioners on the website. So please get JLA their feedback to JLA, I think by Tuesday, tomorrow is what they're hoping for. And then work is ongoing with the full transition over to the .gov website. And hopefully everyone's up and using their .gov emails by now. And if we do keep twice monthly meetings, the communication committee's plan is to give a full report to the authority at the second meeting of the month. But if that scheduling is going to shift, then we will obviously probably revisit that as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any questions from anyone from what we've heard from any of our committees? I'm not seeing any. Okay, we will move now into our unfinished business, which is our mission statement, vision, and values for the Hood River White Salmon Bridge Authority. Has everyone had a chance to review these mission, vision, and guiding principles? And is there any discussion? Is everybody rereading them one last time?
I kind of like this revised version myself. I like how you took the pillars and added it into the project itself. So I think it's improved.
I did have one note on the second bullet under vision, and it's, I guess, half grammatical and half intent. I think we need to just restructure that sentence slightly. A facility that is constructed and operated in a community sensitive manner seems like an odd wording. And obviously it's catching environmentally and culturally, but I think it's just a case change issue. And maybe we change it to a facility that's constructed and operated in an environmentally and culturally sensitive manner that is prioritizing community input, or that is community centered. But there's just a weird action play there with how community is situated in the sentence.
I think, you were talking about the lack of parallel structure, so it's a structural problem, it's not a content problem. So I suggest that we break that out into its own bullet item, and then it doesn't have to attempt to parallelize its structure structurally. Did you not want to have 4 bullets? Is that a problem?
I just want confirmation that you all want 4 bullets.
Oh, I'm not talking. I just was trying. I think I followed Arthur. Yes, there's just an issue with the way that it's phrased in that second bullet. I think we can easily tweak it and keep the full 3 bullets, but if you're wanting to pull it and have it situated elsewhere, I think that's fine too. I'm not trying to remove anything that bullet's capturing. It's just capturing one component in an odd way right now.
So how about if we add a bullet that says a facility that responds to community needs, and then remove community from that second bullet?
Yeah, that works great.
Are we a facility that responds to community needs, or would we be a body? And we're not I mean, if we're really, I'm not trying to wordsmith here, but if this is something we're gonna agree to, I think the overall is really great, it has great ideas, but I don't think it's ready to vote personally, because it's very clunky. It doesn't read like an actual mission or vision statement that you see in other agencies, and it's doesn't say anything. it has a lot of ethereal, like it doesn't define what it is, and I think there's a way to actually concrete this, which I believe would actually occur after we go through the R2A2s, to be honest with you, given we're gonna define the responsibilities and that kind of thing. Not trying to push us off. I know we want to get this done, but this is, in my opinion, for mission and vision, it doesn't really encompass what we're doing. It has a lot of, it's very clunky and not really easy to understand.
I'm
Any
fine
other-
to keep workshopping this, and I'm fine to move with Catherine's suggestion of how we want to process that. I would also say it could be a good exercise if maybe this needs to just get offloaded over to communications, and we can work to refine this and have it be more refined and then bring it back. That would be one way. Or we can continue to work through it as a full board. But I also agree that I don't. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to jump on you. I was just going to say, I also agree that I think we have time to continue to work on this and make sure that it's something that really captures what we're intending and is long lasting.
I second your motion to move this over to the communication team to continue working on.
Okay.
Is there any further discussion?
I guess I was surprised. I thought that's where it had come from. That's why when Marla started talking about the structure, I was thinking, now I understand.
You're like, that's weird. She's correcting herself. No, we haven't seen this. So, but I think it would be great. And it seems like a natural fit that should have worked its way through communication. So we can certainly take a pass at that and bring something back for broader input.
Thank you very much, Marlon. So we have motion to, and a second to send the mission, vision, and values to the communications committee. Is there any last discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, we are going to move into our new business. The first item in new business is a public hearing to take public testimony on the exemption and use of the progressive design bill. I will hereby, actually, I will start with the staff review.
So as part of the LRS, we have to approve an exemption to the contracting to use an alternative method. So that's what the hearing is for. This has been put into the DJC publications. It was put out 2 weeks ago, so we're just bringing it to the board now to have the hearing on it so that we can approve it and move forward. Similar, same approval that was done by the bi-state working group and the port, but just now having the authority to confirm that.
Thank you very much. I will hereby open public hearing for public testimony. There will be 3 minutes per individual for public testimony. We will begin as always in the room. If there's any public testimony, I am not seeing any. We will take this online. Is there anyone who would like to provide public testimony on the use of the progressive design build for the exemption? Raise your hand, turn your video on, *6 to unmute yourself. I am not seeing any. Okay, I will now close the public hearing to public testimony. And I don't think there needs to be any corrections or statements or questions by staff of the public testimony.
Sorry, I just had one question. I just want to make sure we got this right. So how many days notice was required for this, and did we meet that notice requirement?
Yes, it was a 2-week notice and we met the 2-week notice.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions of staff? I'm not seeing any. If that is the case, I would entertain a motion to send a recommendation to have staff come up with findings of fact to support the exemption and use of the progressive design bill.
I so move.
I'll second that.
There's a motion in a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you very much. That was our first public hearing. We will now move into the approval and correction of the minutes from 9/25/2023. Staff, do you have any update on what the corrections were? Has everybody had a chance to review those corrected minutes? Okay. I would entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the correction of minutes from 9/25/23.
Second that.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. 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 Anyways, the motion carries. Okay, we will now move into new item, the ODOT bridge loan update from staff.
So I met with Katie from Thorn Run Partners. We met with Nick Carrero and Cindy Lesmeister. So Nick is Debt and Finance Analysis Program Manager with ODOT. And Cindy is the Oregon Transportation Infrastructure Fund Program Manager with ODOT. We met with them to just discuss opportunities for them to advance funding from the $20 million lottery bond sale that they will do in 2025 in order to fill any gaps in cash flow that we may have in this first year. And just kind of backstop us a little bit to give us some cushion there. They thought that this was something that they could do. What we talked to them about was a $5 million, I'll call it bridge loan. That might not be the exact correct term for it. That would be almost like act like a line of credit. You pay interest based on what you take out. There's an application process that we need to go through for approvals. It would be, there's a 1% fee, administrative fee that ODOT has on it. The interest rate would be not quite as good as TIFIA, but not market. They thought it was right now is like 4.5%. But of course that changes every day, but they, it was decent rate on what we end up borrowing, not on the full amount. But they thought they could do us an amount up to 5 million. And they said, if for some reason we got to that 5 million and needed 6, that there was an opportunity to increase it a little bit. We couldn't go back for another 10 or something like that, but we could increase it. So the question, I guess, is a couple questions that came up in our discussion. One, and they're looking into this, was can the funds go directly from ODOT to the Bridge Authority? They're looking into that, or whether it would need to go to the port. The other one is because of the credit rating of the Bridge Authority. There's a couple questions related to that. One was, could the $20 million lottery bond act as our collateral to the loan and give us enough credit to do it on our own? If not, then could we get a co-signer, potentially the port, as a co-signer for the loan in order for us to be able to qualify for better rates and have a better credit backing? They're checking on the collateral piece to see if it could be used. We could not use the $20 million lottery bond to pay the interest, but we could use other state funding sources that we would have. So like the Washington grant, the ARPA grants, they believe we could use that because they don't consider that federal in order to pay the interest. And there were some different terms in there that we could get into as far as interest only payments, whatever that would be. My thought would be as soon as we get the lottery bonds, we just pay it off and not continue to pay the interest on it. So I think the question right now is this something that you would like us to continue to pursue, fill out the application process and start to work with ODOT to allow us access to these funds?
In my opinion, I think we need to get this vehicle in place because we're likely going to have to tap into it. At the same time, I don't think we should give up working with both, Oregon as well as Washington to see if we can't move some funding forward. As we came out of the, transportation presentation, a couple of the folks came up to me afterwards and said, "You're not asking for more money, you're asking for an acceleration." And it seems like we should be able to do something like that. So in a nutshell, I think we ought to go forward with this credit application, if you will. Don't rely on it yet. Keep pushing hard on Washington and as well as Oregon to see if we can't move some of that forward a little bit. I'm very concerned about next year. Once we get past that, then I think we're okay.
Yeah, and there's a few other funding sources that we're waiting to hear on. We've got up to 9 million in appropriations that potentially could come to the project. As well as the federal, depending on what they do with the MPDG and how quickly that would be accessed. Washington still hasn't completely locked down what they're gonna do. Is they did the 5 million is state, whether the 10 million is really federal and whether that can come straight to us or has to go through ODOT. So there's other things that still need to be worked on. So I agree we need to work on those as we do this, but it's kind of a backup plan, if you will, on just providing another source of funding for us that, it'd be nice to have access to if we would need it. There's a few next steps just to kind of outline what we got to do. One, we need to confirm that the port would be willing to co-sign if needed it. If not, we would need to probably find another co-sign, maybe one of the counties, or someone. We need to fill out the Oregon Transportation Infrastructure Bank application. We need to get an initial internal ODOT approval on the application. We need to complete the ODOT application. And then we'll get the larger approvals, including DOJ, if we go for any larger amounts. If we keep it under 5 million, then we don't have to do that, and it can be approved by the ODOT at the ODOT level, which is why we were looking at doing less than 5 million or right at 5 million. So those are just the steps that we still need to do.
So I guess I'm just not following, the state of Oregon has committed 20 million of lottery dollars as soon as the bonds are sold. So why wouldn't that work adequately to secure this ODOT loan? We're just not sure on that.
They're just not sure. They had not ever done that. So they needed to go back and see if legally they could do that. They didn't say no, they could not. They said they needed to go back and look at it and make sure.
Just for my own clarification, so this would be a line of credit, call it a line of credit that we wouldn't necessarily need unless we actually needed it. And right now it looks like we're definitely going to need it if nobody moves the funding up, correct?
I would say that we absolutely, there is nothing that says we absolutely need it right now. There is a potential to need it depending on what other funding comes in between now and June of next year. So there's a lot of questions about the ODOT funding, or not the WSDOT funding timing, as well as the appropriations money timing and federal money timing. So depending on how all of those come together would depend on whether we need this or not.
I will just offer up, I'm more pessimistic than you are.
About which,
Trying to get all of these agencies to bring forward their funding and all the intricacies that we have to do to wind that funding between agencies until it gets to us. I think it's prudent for us to have a backup position so we don't have to send certain people home.
I might be Mike's alternate, but we're completely in line. I think it behooves us to have redundant measures for funding, simply because we have contractors that we want to bid on projects, and the more potential ways we have to pay them, I think is imperative for this project to still maintain on time and under budget kind of thing. So I know I'm an alternate, but I would strongly urge us to put all of the applications out possible. And then if we have too much money, gosh darn, that'd be a terrible thing to have.
I just like to point out, you're supposed to be here. You're supposed to be commenting, so I apologize for being an alternate. We want you to talk up.
So there's three avenues forward. One is trying to get the bonds sold early. That'd be the first ideal. The second is doing the loan for the bonds. And the third is pushing on all the other funding we already have secured. All right.
I'm not sure that the selling the bonds early is what so we've been attached by the legislature to these bonds, and I think it's possible to shuffle us to another funding vehicle, which is, I think, really what we've requested, because these bonds are scheduled to be sold and we're not going to change that, I think.
A question on the expiration of the loan. Does it expire if we apply for it and we don't use it? Can we use it later on? And there's a $50,000 application fee. It'd be nice to know that we get something out of that, a longer term thing.
Yeah, Katie, that was one question we did not ask, was the lifespan of the loan. I don't know if you know more on that, Katie.
I know there's some long-term projects that they have, so I don't think that there's a lifetime of the loan. I don't think there, as far as I know, an application fee up front. And I will also add that there is a highly unlikely chance that we're going to be able to get a bond sale in or earlier than what we have already received for the $20 million.
Well, one thing to keep in mind here, folks, is that even as the other funding comes in, there's going to be a timing issue with certain of the funding that we have to pay first with some funds, and then we get paid back. It kind of depends on which fund you're talking about, when it takes place, and so on. So I personally think the critical period of time for this whole issue is between now and probably end of 26. If we're in the same condition in 27, we got much bigger problems.
I would agree with that. And I mean, from the project cost estimates, it looks like it'd only really be useful between now and the end of 26. At that point, we're going to be burning $5 million a week, and this isn't going to get us very much. So, but still looking at the timeline, I could see if it expired at the end of 24, it'd be something we should think about.
Mike, we can always go back to ODOT and confirm that, but I'm pretty sure there isn't an expiration of it. If we don't tap into it right now or in 24 and 25, I don't think by the end of 26 that it would be a problem if the project hasn't touched it.
Yeah, they didn't give us any indication that there was like an expiration to it, but we didn't explicitly ask it, but they did not indicate that it would be that way.
One final question. There was a mention of a 1%, I thought, and then that sounded like that may not be the case. Administrative fee, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was when you call it an application fee. They have a 1%, same difference. They have a 1% fee that ODOT puts on it. But yeah, it's not necessarily an application fee, but it's a administrative fee. So I think that's what Katie was responding to.
And we can also confirm that 1% is only payable once we use it. It's not like a flat 1% on the front end, but it's my understanding that is when you start accessing it, it's the rate plus 1%. So if we do 5 million, it's not 1% on 5 million and then the percentage on whatever we use. I think it's the 1% plus the rate as we use it, if that makes sense.
Exactly like a line of credit as a small business owner. So that's, I mean, it's pretty, and 1% is pretty low if you are, yeah, it's pretty good.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, and I apologize for not having more information in the packet, but we're getting the confirmation on this late last week, so thought it was worth the topic and the discussion, but we didn't have a chance to get it get everything confirmed before the meeting, so.
So I would say the 5 million is great. It's a good start. It matches our ARPA dollars, which we're in essence using as our cash right now. But as we get closer and closer to ARPA running out, because we're gonna have to spend actual ARPA dollars, we're gonna need this or something like this in order to make up that cash difference. The next question I would have is, can we do the same thing with Washington? Because we were talking about the 9 million from the feds, but if anybody's noticed, the federal government's currently not operating almost. At least the legislature isn't, and that 9 million is supposed to be coming through the legislature if they pass a budget, and their odds of actually passing a real budget. So I'm a little concerned on that.
Yeah, and I'll follow up with Brad to see if Washington has a similar potential, so we can do that. One thing to remember is we cannot pay this back with federal money. They do not, because they use state money for it. They do not want to mix federal money into their pot. So we will have to pay it back with some type of state money, which can be the lottery bond thing, but
We can always use one state's money against the other state.
Mike, I think what they told us is that we cannot use our future lottery bonds of the $20 million to repay it. Not that we can't use federal money, like we can use ARPA money.
correct. We can use ARPA because
Yeah.
they don't consider ARPA to be federal, but like the build grant, we would not be able to use like build grant federal money.
Correct.
To pay it back. It has to be some kind of state money.
But it can't, but the 20 million, I'm sorry, the lottery funds cannot be used to pay the interest through ODOT, is that correct?
Yes. That's correct.
I would suggest we go ahead and proceed. Fill out all the forms and so on, and before you submit it, you bring it back here for final approval, but at that time. You've worked out all the little intricacies and the rules that we're gonna have to live to. But I would suggest we move forward with it.
And I would like to at least have staff look at the difference between maybe 5 million and 10 million if they were to go that high.
So we talked to them about, we actually started at 10 million and they can't do that. They don't have the funds to do 10 million. They said they could do 5. It keeps them out of some different approvals. And then we could ask for a little bit more than that if we run up against the 5 million cap. But they said 10 million was in their starter. They don't have the funds in their account to do that.
So I agree with Commissioner Fox in moving it forward, but when we do have the details, if we have to pay 50,000 up front, whether or not we use it, then I would have second thoughts about moving forward with it as quickly as we might otherwise.
All right, I give staff direction. Is there any final comments on this? Seeing none, we are going to move on to the calendar and Commissioner Babbitt.
Yeah, so this is a simple one. So I was last week I was planning my weekend and I noticed that the spiritual family from Todd, it occurred to me that we established whose calendar we on. Municipal calendars or what. So what I would like to request is, does HNTB have a calendar, employee calendar that you live by? And if you could share that with us, and then we can look at maybe the Hood River County calendar or some other Oregon government calendar, and then we as a group can simply choose which calendar we believe is ours.
Yeah, we can do that. We only get 7 holidays, so we probably have the lowest number of holidays. Just FYI.
Suggest we look at the county's calendar.
As an elected official, you get no holidays. Okay, we're now moving on to informational items that staff would like to hit.
All right, the government site, as Marla said earlier, we were working on getting the .gov website up. Once we're also working through a new office lease. Once we get those two together, then we will update the meeting to be everybody's .gov to be on that meeting invite, and we will only use the .gov. We're trying to make that transition now, so anything I send out, I'm trying to make sure it's only to your .gov. I CC you if I know you haven't set your .gov up, just to make sure you get stuff. But if you could start to get transitioned over and get everybody transitioned over to the .gov, we'd like to switch over and just start using the .gov primarily for everyone, for interactions related to the board. So we'll continue to go in that direction. We have a presentation on Thursday of this week to the PNWA. We're on a board of it's transportation today and tomorrow. It's our project, IBR, WashDOT and ODOT. They're 10 minutes each, but it's basically a transportation panel. So I'll be sitting on that panel on Thursday. And then I'll do a project update meeting to the Columbia River Gorge Commission. The RFP schedule is still in here, no changes to that. The office relocation, we're still waiting on the lease back from the office that we're looking at. So they said they thought we would get that back today. Their legal is drafting that. So as soon as we get that, we'll send it out. The 1031 congressional visit, if you're going to attend that event, let us know. Just send us an email if you'll be able to attend that. It's from, as I said, 10 to 2.
You have an agenda yet for that day, and what presentations are you expecting and that kind of thing?
So we haven't talked about presentations. We were thinking about 30 minutes here on the White Salmon side in this building. If we're not in our new office space, hopefully we'll be in the new office space by then. And we'll do the meeting from there. And then we were going to leave about an hour and a half to do a field visit tour on a boat, taking them out from the Oregon side out and just kind of looking around the bridge and did perspective from the water. And then coming back over here around the lunchtime to do a kind of just a networking session with them at everybody's.
So the reason why I bring this up is it seems to me about 2 weeks later, there's several of us going out to DC to meet with these folks' parents back in DC. So to me, we ought to be thinking about what message are we trying to send the staffers and what we want the staffers to send back to DC and how we're going to play off of that in DC. And I don't know if we've thought through that yet.
No, and we'll start putting that together. We'll be working with Summit on solidifying some of that, but we'll start putting together some thoughts around that.
But I would also suggest that this is a great win for Marla and the communications team to kind of spearhead this with everybody else to try and figure out those talking points and how we're going to build off of that when we get out there.
So I think that the JTC, the Joint Transportation Committee meeting that we had, the presentation that was done there, I think worked quite well in highlighting the points. And I know we got feedback from Representative Fai's executive assistant that we had covered the points that he was going to need to understand what we were looking for. So I think we're pretty far along with that. I'm not worried that this is an unknown. What are you worried about?
I just think it's
Yeah, and I would just say we've
consistency.
had conversations from the communications meetings to this point with HNTB team regarding the October 31st visit, and we'll continue. And I think, you know, some of this too, yes, we've been out to DC and those are the parents, but we've probably spent more time with some of those staffers and have more face time and recognition in those DC offices than with some of their regional representatives. And so I think a lot of this too is just that extended and continued relationship building that we need at all levels of their offices to really reinforce the commitment we have to the project and what it is we are, as you said, asking from them. So I do think that we are in coordination internally on realizing how these two visits and meetings will connect together, both the DC trip and the October 31st visit, but certainly hear your feedback too, that for the next meeting, we'll have a more fuller presentation so that the whole authority is aware walking into Halloween, that there's no spooky surprises.
One of the things I was thinking of, but we're not going to be ready for it, is to take the core samples back to DC with us and hand them out as little trinkets. That's not going to be ready for this time, but if you remember, there's a number of those offices that we went to and they had photos of the covered area. Some of them were orchards, some of them were fishing, some of them were mountain scenes and so on. And I wonder if it makes sense economically to put together a very small collage of what the new bridge is going to look like. Put it in a cheap frame and give it to them to keep reminding them, and they ought to put it up on the wall. And the next time we go in, we put a little happy face or something on it.
I would suggest that we pass that along to the communications group and let them work on that. What I saw work incredibly well at the Joint Transportation Committee meeting was I spoke with 4 legislators specifically who made various forms of comments on the specificity and detail of our cash flow model that convinced them that, number one, that we actually knew what we were talking about, we knew what the bridge was going to cost, and that we understood how to build something. So I think continuing along those lines is ideal, and I absolutely, giving them a nice scenic photo to put on the wall that reminds them of this project is great. I'm sure that Marla's team can figure out something that would be attractive. And I have all the historic photos if you need access to those, Marla.
Great.
One other thing is we updated the roster. We added a new member on there, so you'll find your updated roster in here. If you want an electronic version of that, just email us, or you can pull it out of the PDF, or if you want the Excel file, let us know. But we're trying to update those anytime we make changes, so that's updates in there also. And then we talked about the bridge report. That was it for the informational items.
Mike, I have a quick question on the Pacific Northwest Waterways Association. I noted that neither the commission nor HNTB were actually members of the Pacific Northwest Waterways Association. Is that something we should consider? I saw the Port of Hood River is on there, but we're a distinct organization at this point.
So I would recommend we do not. My company was a member, and it's more of a, personally, it's getting your logo up on their website, and we're not really, in my opinion, needing their assistance to move this forward, because we are doing a really good job ourselves, and I think that's money that we need to keep, because the dues are pretty high, just to be honest with you. I would recommend we not. I think being there is actually more beneficial than having our logo on their website. But personally, I would not. That's funding that we necessarily wouldn't need, just because we're able to meet without their assistance for that connection there. So that's just my opinion.
I'll add on from the port point of view. The port's been a member for quite a while. Last year, I was the port representative on the association. Frankly, good or bad, I didn't see any real benefit to the Port of Hood River, our local region, for what they're doing there. The biggest thing that could be is their interface on setting priorities for the Army Corps of Engineers and dredging. That's it. So I kind of agree. I think we could spend our money better someplace else.
Tell you that Port was the host of it. I think it was in 1950, and it had a beautiful sheet cake that looked like a tugboat. So it sounds like it's changed a little bit since then.
Did you say 1915 you were there?
It's not very number two. I said 1950. We have photographs in the museum collection from that meeting.
Okay, with that, we're going to move into our presentations. First, we have survey, right of way, and jurisdictional limits.
That must be the button. All right, well, thank you. Oh, that doesn't move. Let me share my screen here. Aim the mic more at you. All right, I'm gonna slide over here. I will. Thank you. Come on. Okay, well, I'll do an introduction and then I'll try to get this going. My name is John Yamashita. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm a land surveyor with OTAC Incorporated. My office is in Portland, Oregon. I'm a Washington resident though, commute across a different bridge every day. I'm here to talk about land surveying and how it supports the right-of-way process that we're all going to be going through over the next couple of years. And so I'm new to this mic system, so if anybody has any questions, I guess just wave your hands and I'll turn off my mic, and I'm happy to entertain questions at any point during the presentation. Don't have to hold them till the end. If I go too deep, too shallow, just feel free to holler out. And I'm sorry we're not able to pair this up with Teal's presentation of a couple of weeks ago, since they kind of go hand in hand. I had some conflicts I couldn't get out of. Let's see, so Kelly, it's F5, right, to run? There we go. All right. Okay, and you can't see what I can see on this is perfect. Okay, so is this going to stay? All right. If anybody sees the computer start sliding off, please let me know. Okay, so how the land surveying process supports the overall right-of-way process. We resolve the existing right-of-ways. We have to know where the property lines and right-of-ways are before we can decide how much property is impacted by the project. We figure out where abutting property lines are. We're right. Haha. All right. There we go. Where right-of-way lines are, property corner monuments. We establish survey control for the project, and we try to figure out where existing easements related to rights of ways are. After the right-of-way needs are determined, then we calculate the areas of the impacts, and we figure out where we're going to prepare temporary construction easements, permanent easements for things like utilities and sidewalks, access, and then right-of-way where that needs to be the case. And we prepare the legal descriptions for those. And in Oregon, this is what a typical legal description package looks like. It's got the legal description, which is on the left, a sketch that accompanies it, has some technical information to help it be retraced. And we prepare these in conformance with the jurisdiction we're doing them in. And so in this case, and we'll go over these a little bit later, but we're going to be utilizing ODOT format, WSDOT format, and then doing something special for Burlington, Northern Santa Fe. The Washington Department of State Land, I'm sorry, Oregon Department of State Lands and the Washington DNR each have their own format. One of the things to point out is that right-of-way acquisitions may or may not include an access restriction. So, and sometimes the right-of-way acquisition may just be an access restriction. And what that is you don't want cars just coming into, say, a highway 14 or, I-5 at any point. So sometimes the only rights that are being bought are the rights to directly access a right-of-way or the right to access a right-of-way in only one location. And so you can imagine with this project, we really want to have controls on where traffic is entering the project and leaving it. So there might be instances where the only acquisition is a right of access. Many times, right of access will go along with a larger right-of-way description and acquisition, but sometimes they stand alone. Let's see. Okay.
After these descriptions are prepared and everybody is happy with their location and extent, then we usually go out and stake these on the ground so everybody can see what they look like. So the appraisers, typically this is really mainly for the appraiser, but landowners want to see where that acquisition is going to be. We want to have the project team be able to view them and see exactly what impact is going on. Sometimes you can look at a map for hours and not really see a detail or something that is being impacted that you really want to avoid, and having it staked out in the field is a great way for everybody to do that. So we do a lot of research when we're doing our work. So it's the counties have their own research sites that we, thoroughly comb through, but also we get in touch with WashDOT, ODOT for their maps that are not available and not available publicly and easily, but you have to do in Washington, you do a FOIA request to get copies of maps. In Oregon, they host those on an intranet site. So we do a lot of research to figure out where the existing right-of-ways are, where existing property lines are. And then we retrace these lines, looking at the deed elements, all these different right-of-way establishments. And we have some interesting things going on both sides of the river that are going to make this have certain elements that are going to be more complicated than you might see in a normal project. But this is a bi-state project, really pretty unique, and it's going to have some interesting elements to overcome. And then, of course, we figure out, this is where it really all comes together, is we figure out where these lines are on the ground. So it's not just a theoretical map of where these lines are a 50-foot right-of-way, but where that 50-foot right-of-way or 100-foot right-of-way is on the ground exactly. So again, I said thorough research of deeds. This little map I have on the screen that you can't really see very well, that is actually the WashDOT map of the Washington side of the bridge landing, showing the WashDOT right-of-ways. They have a parcel that they use for stormwater treatment, and what looks like the road for the bridge is actually just a parcel that the Port Hood River owns. So we have two different things going on in our surveying world. Both we have a lot of different ownership types, and then we have jurisdictions. So when we're acquiring right of way for ODOT or for the Washington State Department of Transportation, it's in their jurisdiction, but it's not their property. And in this case, we're going to be acquiring right of way that ultimately will be on behalf of one of those jurisdictions. So we're going to use their standards, as I said earlier, and make sure that any right of way that we acquire that is going to be turned over ultimately to a different jurisdiction, that we do it in a way that's going to be prepared to their satisfaction. So that transfer, when it happens, is something that is familiar to their standards and will be readily accepted. Let's see. So talking about where these things are ultimately going to be reviewed, WashDOT Southwest region, we understand will be reviewing our work to make sure that ultimately it conforms to their standards. Let's see, let's go back. Okay, it looks like I'm staying on this side of the river. Washington Department of Natural Resources has their own special process to grant easements and leases over lands of the state. And really, it turns out to be just a map, not a legal, well, it's a legal description on a map, but not a recorded deed. They have that process. This is a picture of one that I just did for a new outfall into Columbia River that goes under a couple of bodies of water on its way there. And switching into Oregon, we understand that Region 1 is going to be looking at all of our work on the Oregon side of the river, Oregon Division of State Lands, which back up, and because I didn't say this, Oregon Division of State Lands and Washington Department of Natural Resources are the departments of the states that are entrusted with the care of the bedlands of the state, which includes lakes and navigable rivers like the Columbia River. And so that's why we're introducing our documents to them as well and gaining easements and leases, because that's where the bridge, of course, goes over. We're not building necessarily outside of some footings and columns in the river, but it still shades. We still need that right to cross the river. Burlington Northern Santa Fe is actually, I list them later on as a public entity. They're not a public entity, but they operate like one. So timeline wise, we try to keep them grouped together with other public entities because that's really how they operate. Much different than dealing with a private entity. And then the United States government BIA process is still yet to be determined. We haven't dug into that too deeply. Let's see. One other thing that's it's not necessarily related to the acquisitions, but it is related to our work overall, is that there are survey monuments, property corners, right-of-way monuments that are ultimately going to be destroyed by this project. And both states have laws to make sure that if that destruction happens, that the locations of those monuments are perpetuated and then replaced at the end of the project. Or if they end up in a new road, which some of these current property monuments are, that we put monuments at the edge of the new right-of-way. And really what that helps do is minimize the impact to landowners who have property corners before a project goes through. And when that project is over, they no longer have corners. And that can be very expensive if they need to know where those are to replace that. So we are tasked with making sure that that doesn't happen, that those monuments are replaced. And it could be a separation of a long time between when the project starts and when that is completed. But ultimately it gets done, and that is, those surveys are done to the standards of the counties that we're in. There are state rules, but ultimately the counties are where those maps are documented and filed. Yeah.
If you take out a monument, you don't necessarily have to put it back in the same spot if the roadway's going over the top of it. But you have to put it in some kind of a location with known offsets that people can reestablish those corners. Is that not right?
Yes, exactly. In fact, Oregon's law specifically says if their corner falls out in the road now, don't put it there, put it in someplace more practical. And usually what we do is where their property line intersects the new right of way and say, might have been out here 20 feet, now it's here. That's where we put it. So it's more useful because, a property corner out in the middle of Highway 14 is even for us, we don't care to go dig around in the road trying to get those. We wouldn't want a homeowner to do it. And so, definitely those property corners are referenced out to where the new property line is, in most cases, as close as we can. And then other monuments are set where the right of way may jog in or out or have a little curve, things of that nature. Yep. It's a great question. Thank you. Let's see. Oh, and then I guess I haven't been paying attention to time, but we're at the point here where I'm just going to run through all the different ownerships that we've identified on both sides of the river and that we're looking into more. Most of this information comes from the respective county websites. There's one little anomaly that I'm going to point out that we're looking into already. But if something looks incorrect or to be different, I'm certainly very interested in to know that, because these are more for tax assessment and tax assessment purposes. So traditionally counties don't put as much care into the mapping of parcels that don't generate taxes like rights of ways and other publicly owned parcels. So if you do see something that looks incorrect, certainly reach out to me and let me know. And we've already been in discussions with the Hood River County assessment and GIS folks to share information when we're done so they can make their GIS as accurate as possible. So on the Washington side, we have WashDOT right-of-way. What you see here is Highway 14 right-of-way, as well as a stormwater pond and a couple of parcels that are not really road. One's a parking lot. Actually, I think two of them are parking lots. So we have WashDOT ownership in a couple of different, qualities, if you will, right-of-way and other purposes. We have the United States of America. So Bureau of Indian Affairs has the tribal fishing area, the treaty fishing area, on the west side of the bridge. And then they happen to own another parcel upstream. Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad, of course, goes underneath the current bridge and through the project area. The Porter Hood River owns the area that's currently, looks like road and right of way, where the bridge lands. Citywide Salmon owns several parcels on both sides of the road, including the majority of where dock grade road goes through. And Klickitat County has some properties here. Sometimes with the county properties, we're not really sure if they actually have fee title to the property, if it's just simply a little unknown whether they own it or not. So we'll be looking into these a little bit further. One of the things to talk about, and it shows up much clearer on the Washington side of the bridge than the Oregon side of the bridge, is that the property lines extend to the shore of a water body as it existed at statehood when the federal government handed over some of these properties, and any changes, any natural changes since that transition occurred. So, you know, so we have property lines out here that are quite a bit into the river, and that is because the Bonneville project, being an unnatural inundation, did not change property lines. So even though it is inundated and it's no longer at the shore of the river because that was not a natural change. On the Oregon side in the Hood River GIS, and you'll see that that's going to be copied here, it looks a little different. They've traced property lines along, you know, what looks to be the current modern shoreline. But that's why these lines extend out into the river. This is more likely based on the 1850s and 1860s location of the river from the original government land office surveys. And Williams Pipeline. So there is two tiny little tax lots right up there at the, you might be familiar with. There's a gravel turnout. There are some Williams Pipeline gas appurtenances. There's some Northwest Natural Gas, smaller feeder lines that go to it, one of which crosses the bridge. I reached out to the Klickitat County GIS folks. They have that listed as WashDOT property. The DOT does not show that as anything in their ownership. So we're digging into that a little bit more. It's not uncommon for, again, parcels that don't have any taxes assessed on them to not be shown with the same level of care as taxable parcels. So we're going to be figuring that out a little bit more. Let's see. And Washington State Department of Natural Resources, of course, Bedlands of the state will be working with the DNR Aquatics Division, Lakes and Rivers. Really good folks. So I've worked with them a lot. And then there are private properties here that will also be impacting in part. Before I switch to the other side of the river, any questions on any of these properties? No. All right. Okay, so jumping over to Oregon, just overview. You can't really see my line work that's underlaid under there, but there are lines and they'll become more prominent here in a second. So Oregon Department of Transportation has, of course, I-84 and the approach to I-84. There is a little parcel that is actually ODOT. I've shown it as Port of Hood River because it's leased to the Port of Hood River, but it's actually under ODOT ownership, and I'll go through here. So again, major takeaways: ODOT's right of way, you know, stops well short of the bridge itself. This little triangle, if you will, it was actually is the parcel that is acquired by ODOT, I should say, for the interchange project, and is now leased to the Port of Hood River for park and transportation purposes, I believe it says. So that is currently maintained by the Port of Hood River, but owned by the state. This is Port of Hood River here, and the actual ownership within the marina, it appears to all be Port of Hood River. We're digging into that more. We'll see how that comes out. Yes.
So up there in the upper left corner where you had that piece of land that comes out, juts next to the river, you think that's owned by the port?
We're looking at the older maps and deeds from some lumber companies that went through there, and it appears that they owned out to really probably the original natural shoreline, which could be even further out. I don't know how far our research will need to go downstream in that area, but that's what we're digging into more. So again, right here I'm following, I think, what's showing on the Hood River GIS. But we're going to be digging into that a little bit more. I might not have it traced out all the way downstream, but a little bit more.
The port would be very interested in your findings, especially in that particular area. There's some thought about right now, there's a cruise ship that comes in and docks on the outside of that landmass there, and then there's some that comes inside to the little dock there, and there could be some development there if the port owned that land. And there was a question several times in the last several months. Who really owns that?
Yeah, we'll definitely be, at least for a portion of that, trying to nail down where that ownership is. Oregon Division of State Lands would be everything waterward of where we decide the landward properties end. I'm not sure that this really depicts it properly, except for, excuse me, except for the property that kind of juts out there that is owned by the Porter Hood River, which I think is not next. Maybe I guess we already showed that. And then these are the private lands. There is a little bit of a, I guess I can't see no, that's not my cursor. Well, there's my cursor. There is a little bit of a difference in the right-of-way line along here. If it's of about 8 feet, there's a discrepancy in the record that fairly clearly shows that folks have determined that line in a couple of different places. So we'll be looking at that specifically to understand how any improvements we're going to be making with the bridge project would be impacted by I guess what potentially could be a little bit of a no man's land, but it's an overlap. Let's see, I want to. Yes, let me go back to, unless I missed it. Yes. So, yeah, really just to the north side of the intersection with a little bit of a crossover. But yeah, all the way down to the north side of that intersection.
You're pretty sure that's correct.
That one I'm sure of, yeah.
I've heard other things that says ODOT owns a sliver of that all the way up kind of towards the bridge on the east side.
Okay. No, we didn't see anything. Yep. Yeah, that area is pretty stable. I haven't seen any records that conflict between older ODOT maps to current ODOT maps and the deeds that they list. So that I'm pretty firm with.
So are you familiar with the Bonneville Dam survey maps from 1935?
Yes.
So that's one of the things that you use, and great, because that's another question. Storage easements, would you, is that within your area? I assume the bridge is going to be displacing someone else with the Bonneville pool. Are you the person who works that out, or does someone else do that?
Thankfully, I'm not. But yeah, there will be no rise impacts. I'm sure we have folks that are going to be on the team working on that. Thankfully, not me. But yeah, with the Bonneville project, typically what we have is a river mile and an elevation for the inundation to go to. I've done those calculations up as far as the dowels. Here, we'll be combining those elevations with the bathymetric work that has previously been done on the project to really kind of try to understand where that line may be and how far out it is. But yeah, very interesting and really amazingly well done work. And we think now, how could they have done something so accurately, so well, at this point, 90 years ago, yet they just really did a great job with a great deal of care. So, yeah. Any other questions I can answer?
One thing for us to be aware of on the right of way, we did have some conversations with ODOT and WashDOT. And when it comes to stormwater ponds, typically the departments have a no mixing policy where our water stays in our ponds, their water stays in their ponds. So that's not something that was in the NEPA documents, and we will probably have to look at is having ponds on our right of way, just take our stormwater that we'll now have off the bridge. And keeping that separate from water that would come off of, say, 14 into a washed out pond. So again, just another right of way survey thing that we'll be dealing with as we move forward.
I have a quick question. We've talked previously about staging grounds and things like that for construction materials. Is that something that you guys will handle as well, looking at right of ways or looking at permissions for that? Or is that something that would come from the actual contractor? Do we have a knowledge of that?
Depends on where you're talking. It's going to be somewhat dependent on the construction methodology used by the contractor, what kind of space they need and where it needs to be. But there's going to have to be some kind of access on the Washington side to get down to the river. On the Oregon side, we've got some challenges being able to use that strip right there from the port office down where the boat dock is, and maybe even around the corner a little bit. There's an agreement that was made many years ago that we're gonna have to try and get some relief if we want to use that particular area. To me, it makes a lot of sense to use it. But we gotta get going on it.
I bring it up just because you'd mentioned, we hadn't looked very much farther downstream than this, and it strikes me that a lot of the staging grounds opportunities are downstream of what you've considered so far, so.
Yeah, that's a good point. In Washington, typically what we don't see the staging areas being negotiated as part of the work of the owner. Because then those staging areas become an acquisition and have to be surveyed and monumented to the same level with legal descriptions as any other acquisition. So a lot of times we see in Washington, that responsibility is put off onto the contractor to find and negotiate their own staging. On a project like this, obviously this is a huge scale. We do also see a lot of contractors just set up their own floating staging areas where they can do that. So, any other questions? All right, well, thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we're gonna have our environmental commitments overview from NEPA presentation.
There's the red light. Thanks, Kelly. I appreciate having the opportunity to be here with you all today and talk about the environmental commitments overview. Mike and I were talking about what might be the best, the environmental aspects of this project are dense, and we wanted to just really focus in on some of the emerging commitments that are coming out of the project through the NEPA and Section 106 process, just so the bridge authority is aware of some of these. I'm calling them ancillary projects. That might sound kind of scary and big, but there are some commitments coming out of the NEPA process that will have their own timelines, won't necessarily be part of delivering the actual bridge project. And we just want you guys to be aware of that. I should introduce myself. My name's Stuart Myers. I'm a senior ecologist with Mason, Bruce, and Gerard in Portland, and I'm on the HNTB's team. I'm the environmental compliance lead and look forward to working with you guys and delivering this important project. So I've got a little bit of a general, this is how I like to do presentations. I'm gonna try to skip over this first bullet pretty quickly, because I got a feeling that you guys kind of know where things sit with some of the outstanding NEPA associated requirements. So just in the interest of time, I'll go fast there. Really dig into the meat of some of those commitments there for NEPA and Section 106 next. I've got one slide to just kind of demonstrate the environmental compliance delivery schedule. It's very complex. We were able to get it on one slide, which is pretty amazing. We've been using that as some marketing materials and some of the grant funding applications that we've been having out there. And it's a good segue to talk about some of the non-NEPA regulatory requirements. It feels like a huge lift on this project to get past NEPA, but I'm sure you're all aware, we have quite a bit of more regulatory work after NEPA's done with. Next slide, please, Kelly. So again, I'm going really quickly here. Essentially, the first three bullets you see here are outstanding for the NEPA process. Again, I know I even heard an update today briefly on the tribal fishing MOAs. I won't go into detail here. What I will say is that we're really close in the Section 106 MOA. There's some agreements to work out with the Yakima Nation there, and then it should be signed. We're anticipating that happening by the year's end. Same with National Marine Fisheries Service biological opinion. As I know you're aware, this has been going on for a long time. The latest we'd heard, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's some internal back and forth on comments, dotting some I's, crossing some T's on the biological opinion. But again, we're expecting to see that issued by the end of the year. The tribal fishing MOAs are a little longer lead. Probably we're working with the 4 treaty tribes individually on those, getting some good traction here lately, but we anticipate those might actually bleed into next year. And the HNTB team with Akana kind of driving the bus on this will be pushing those items through. This is not something that we're going to include in the progressive design build contract. And then once these 3 items are wrapped up, the FHWA can sign the ROD, the record of decision, and formally complete NEPA review. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm going to transition into some of these commitments. This slide I'll go pretty quickly on. I know this regulatory stuff can get pretty dense. We're at the end of the day, so I'm going to try to just hit some of the highlights here. I hope to get this done in about 20-25 minutes, but I couldn't get through this process without saying there are, based on the 10% design of the project at NEPA, there are some very broad design and construction commitments coming out of that NEPA process. First, the bridge type and general pier layout. I know you guys are very familiar with the preferred alternative EC-2. It's the orange line there in the graphic on the right of the screen. The new alignment just downstream or to the west of the existing alignment. This project at times feels like a bike and ped project sometimes, given just the amount of bike and pedestrian amenities and connections that are associated with the project. These are things like bike lane widths, how many viewing platforms does the bridge need to have? How are you going to connect into the existing trail network off of the bridge? Those are very important aspects of the project, and that's being driven initially out of the NEPA process here. Aesthetics are a big deal here, especially in the scenic area that we're all in. We're standing up right now. This is pretty exciting. The Aesthetics Committee, which is a NEPA requirement to basically convene a group of regional experts in things like architecture, landscape design, aesthetics, historic preservation. It's really important for us to get this going, and we're getting it going now because and I'll talk about this a little bit later when I get into the federal permitting, the National Scenic Area Management Plan actually has its own chapter for the bridge, which is great. They dedicated a whole chapter to the bridge, but when you read that criteria for the new bridge, it has very subjective requirements, paraphrasing here, but the aesthetics must blend in with the natural aesthetic of the gorge. Well, this is one of those things where the beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? That's very subjective. What I might think is aesthetically pleasing, Mike might not think it's aesthetically pleasing. So we're standing up this committee with folks that can really guide us and help us on that process. And we're engaging with the Gorge Commission quite a bit on standing up that committee. And then the next two bullets here are just kind of general standard types of requirements for big projects. One of the big requirements coming out of NEPA, which is certainly very important, is just maintaining access to businesses and not having the project from a detour standpoint or a construction standpoint hurting businesses. So maintaining those connections and then avoiding impacts to local communities, the port, and natural resources. Next slide, please. So the next area of commitments coming out of the NEPA process here is on the public engagement side. And this one's pretty exciting. I think we've got a really good head start here. JLA has done a great job, I think, of, for instance, standing up the new project website. We have, social media presence, I think, on all the major social media platforms. So we're really getting the word out in terms of the public outreach program. The next bullet here really just gets into some requirements, all the different means and methods of how you get the word out about the project. And you see a theme here about construction. I think the big concern is once the project goes to construction, how is that going to impact the local community in terms of businesses, egress through the project site, that types of things. And then the next few bullets here really move down into once we're in construction, sign detours, 24-hour construction hotline. And then you can see the last two there. The second to last bullet's a little generic, but again, it's this theme of not letting the project really impact the local businesses, making sure customers can get to those businesses. And definitely last but not least on this slide is the tolling. And I know there's been a lot of work already going on with this body and others to really engage on the tolling changes and how the new bridge will change really tolling for the project for the duration of the life of the project. Sure.
Why does the last bullet have anything to do with your effort?
Why does the last bullet have anything to do with our effort? I think NEPA is a really broad law. It gets into how projects can affect local communities. And I think tolling, obviously, it's a big issue for this community, as it should be. And it was something that was keyed in on the NEPA process. So this is just basically saying, when the NEPA review was occurring, the discussions of a tolling increase, how you fund the bridge has to be part of that disclosure and how you are going to build this project. So tolling was identified as an issue for the community. And this is how, one of the ways they want to mitigate potential issues with the public on tolling.
This whole area, if we don't control it very, very carefully, can blow the schedule out for our project. So I personally think we have to have some more discussion before we open the door to make sure that we understand what's going to walk through the door and try and control it.
Well, and that's part of the reason for this presentation is all of these things that you see are things that are already in the NEPA documents that are out there. So they are already things that people have committed to as finalization of the NEPA. So it's just to make you aware. And then, yes, we will have to talk about how we address each one of these as we move forward with the project.
Yeah, and I understand that, and don't have a problem with it at all. But I think the next step before we open everything up is we need to have some discussion about, okay, how are we going to try and keep this thing in a box and not let it squish out and here we go.
Agreed, that was a good point. Next slide, please. The next couple slides I have here are really getting kind of the meat of the commitments that we wanted to speak with you here today on. Section 106 is the historic preservation federal law. And this is really where I think, I talked about these ancillary projects coming out of our main project. This is really what I was talking about. So really the way to think about some of these items here that I've got down are, these are ways to memorialize the existing bridge. The existing bridge is a nationally recognized historic structure, and the actual decommission and demobilization of the bridge is actually an impact on a historic feature. So there's mitigation and all sorts of steps that we need to go through to make sure that process is done properly via the Section 106 rules. So the first one here, that acronym is a historic architectural engineer of record documentation for the existing bridge prior to removal. So that's going to, require an engineer or an engineering group that has that kind of expertise to document that. And you can see here when I have kind of the due dates after all of these bullets, those are within so many years after the record of decision is assigned. So one way to think of this is, once NEPA is done, we have the record of decision, then the clock starts on some of these requirements here. So again, we have other ancillary projects happening under their own schedule as part of this NEPA process and requirements. Another item is an exhibit to be displayed at the History Museum of Hood River. That'll need to be done within 3 years of the ROD. One caveat there is that basically that museum has kind of the first right of refusal to take the exhibit. We did have some language added to the MOA that's in process that if for whatever reason this museum can't or does not want to take that exhibit, another local museum or historical society or whatnot can take it on. So that's not, the point is that doesn't necessarily have to be at that specific facility, but that's how it's currently written. And then you can see the publication of the Columbia River crossings between the both states. And then the 3 permanent outdoor interpretive displays at 3 years after the record of decision. That photo there is just a stock photo from an older bridge project back east, and it just allows you to get an idea of kind of what those displays might look like. Next slide, please. So again, still on Section 106, this first one here is the existing bridge marketing plan. So this is a plan to document how the existing bridge will be potentially reused, whether that's on the new bridge, which would be pretty novel if that can be done, or if it's going to go to a museum or interpretive sites or whatnot. Again, this gets to the idea that that's a protected, regulated resource that we're removing, and it needs to have this reuse plan done with the consulting parties for Section 106, which is quite a few different organizations weighing in on it. And you can see there too that it needs to be secured in a secure location. And finally here, to close out Section 106, there needs to be a traditional cultural property study for the Yakima Nation's property that will be impacted by the project. And the schedule there is just to develop a schedule and kind of a roadmap for that work within 6 months of the ROD being signed. And as part of that too, it's the videographic documentary involving Yakima Nation elders and tribal members. Next slide, please. So I'm going to transition over here to the environmental compliance delivery schedule. I definitely don't expect anybody to read this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Again, this is what I said a little bit earlier, is how we were able to kind of get the entire non-NEPA regulatory process on one page. With on the left column there, those are all of our different approvals and permits that are needed from the project, segregated out by state, local, or federal. The middle column there has our project delivery schedule starting with 2023 through the end of 2026, with different bar graphs kind of showing the amount of time it takes to apply for the permit. And then the back end is the agency review time required to have the permit issued. And those also, I know you can't see it very well, but they align with the different design milestones too for the rest of the design build contract. And then on the right there, we just have specific nuances about each permit. Each permit is a little different. Some have prerequisites that need to happen before you can apply, those types of things. And that's just sort of a notes section that kind of lays out some of the framework for the individual permits. So I just wanted to demonstrate, this is kind of our initial roadmap and working with a progressive design builder on how to deliver all these permits. And with the next several slides, I just want to give you a very high level overview of the federal and state and local regulatory requirements for the project. Again, I could spend an hour or two talking about this, but it's the end of the day and the stuff's relatively dry. So I'm going to try to just give you guys a quick brief overview of it here. So I'm going to start out on the federal side. First and foremost, I have the Coast Guard bridge permit on here first for a reason. This will likely be the longest permit application that's required for the project. And that's just primarily because the Coast Guard requires all federal approvals and permits to be in place before they'll issue a decision on the bridge permit. The good news there is that we've been in contact with them since 2018 through the NEPA process. So many years of coordinating with the Coast Guard on this process, and they are a partnering agency on NEPA. So they've been at the table with NEPA and have been brought along as the project develops. We also, very importantly, have a preliminary navigation determination that the Coast Guard provided. That's what that graphic is over there on the right. And that basically just sets the horizontal and vertical clearances for the nav channel through the new crossing. The Corps of Engineers has two permit requirements for the project. The first one I have here is Section 404 permit that's associated with the Clean Water Act. That's basically a permit for project impacts to waters of the US. So the footprint of the new bridge in the Columbia River and the impacts of removing the old bridge from the Columbia River. I have the Phase 1A mitigation planning sub-bullet there just to point out that the way we've structured the Progressive Design Builders contract is, I think you're probably aware that Phase 1A is the validation process where they're going to come in, they're going to review the NEPA reports, they're going to do additional supplemental reports as needed to fill in any kind of gaps. And right off the bat, we want them to start thinking about if there is mitigation needed for these projects, they need to sit down with us and start talking about what does that look like and what's the schedule for delivering that, because there could be mitigation required with the Corps for the 404 permit. The Corps also requires a 408 permission that has to do with the navigation channel. The navigation channel is a U.S. federal public works infrastructure facility, much like some dams, dikes, levees. The Corps has jurisdiction over those features, and so they will be at the table with us once we start talking specifics for the bridge work around the nav channel. Again, we've been talking to them since 2018. They've been brought along pretty well through that during that time, and they were a partnering agency under NEPA as well. I briefly mentioned the Columbia Gorge Scenic Area Act and compliance needed for that. For this project, it's an important local process that we're going to need to go through. And we have been having ongoing coordination with the Gorge Commission. I know Kevin Greenwood was attending some of their meetings before our team got on board and giving them updates. And now Mike's doing that. So I think I heard you said there's a presentation coming up. So that's great to hear. And I already referenced the aesthetics committee. I won't spend too much more time on that, but I really think that aesthetics committee is going to really help achieve proactive scenic area compliance. And then this last bullet here, it kind of gets into something I think Commissioner Fox was talking about briefly just a minute ago. I could spend a lot of time on this, so I'll keep it brief. But back in the early 1970s, the port was awarded federal grants through the Land and Water Conservation Fund. It's a federal grant funding opportunity that has funds for public entities for developing recreation amenities such as Marina Park and the various elements that the port has developed and managed during that time. One of the stipulations with that funding is if you have impacts to an area boundary that was funded to implement those improvements, you have to basically go through a regulatory process with the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. And what I don't have listed here is the National Park Service is the federal entity that's involved in this. And so this has been a kind of a long lead item that our team's been working on for a few months here. We've been engaging with OPRD on what we think the Section 6F boundary should be based on quite a bit of detailed deed review and documentation. And I think, John, this could be an area where we could team up, and we've got a lot of information on the history of land use and ownership and purchasing land and splitting land out around the port area. So we can share those files with you. So that's still outstanding. We've been kind of pressing a little bit harder on OPRD on giving us some answers, and also want to sit down and talk to them about a potential conversion pathway, because the way the law is written, if you have a land use impact that impacts an area that was dedicated for recreation, you have to offset or mitigate those impacts through a conversion. And that conversion basically means provide an equal amount of land somewhere else that can be dedicated to recreation. Well, one of our pitches is this bridge project is a recreation project as well, right? In fact, I think you would all agree with me that after this project's done, recreation amenities in the project area will be better than they are now. So we're having a conversation with them and we're kind of asking them to kind of think a little bit outside the box on this of whether or not it could be viewed as not as a compliant land use that is compliant with the intent of the Land and Water Conservation Fund Act. So they're actually this week, the last time I checked in with OPRD about a week or two ago, they were meeting with their NPS counterpart on the federal level to basically discuss our proposed boundary for 6F around the ports area. And also some of these ideas we've had about avoiding a conversion, or at least if there is a conversion needed, how we can streamline that process. Because as Commissioner Fox mentioned, this is a process that's going to take some time, and we don't want any surprises on this in terms of what's going to happen.
My big concern on this is that we've known now for a year, at least a year, that spot is probably we're gonna need. And we hit a roadblock with this particular issue. And it seems like we're kind of dancing around it, where this agreement was made 50 years ago for less than $70,000. And it's holding up, or will hold up, a $500 million project, which is exactly what you said. Once we're done with it, we're going to make it even better when we depart from it. It makes no common sense. So what I'm concerned about is if we're dealing with the lower level people and they're only looking at the regulation, we got to get 3 steps above it until we get somebody that's got kind of some common sense and can look at the bigger picture. And I'm very concerned that this is going to be on the critical path of this job.
You talking about X?
Just to lay down is the logical place to put.
Well, one element of one of the things I think you said, Commissioner Fox, that we did get some positive feedback from OPRD on was that if you mentioned staging on the Oregon side and potentially using the port property there, it sounds like there's an opportunity to use that area right by the existing boat ramp as a staging laydown area without triggering a conversion. That's what we've gotten preliminarily.
That's what we want.
Yeah.
But I think the issue is going to be, how do you remove access for the fishermen from that boat dock parking slip? We talked about, we'll build another one on the opposite side. This project will pay for it. But we got to get to that decision point.
And we have laid that out to OPRD, and they didn't think that that would be a permanent conversion. So that was some good news that we got relatively recently. Another idea that Mike and I have been kicking around, and I assume this body's discussed too, is that there's a master plan for a park on this side of the bridge with the city. And unfortunately, we've asked the question of whether or not any kind of conversion or mitigation properties could be on the Washington side. And the way the rule is written now is that we have to keep the mitigation on the Oregon side, but there still could be some room for discussion on that front after we do a little more due diligence. I just wanted to at least acknowledge Bridge Park, because when you look across the river, it's not really far. And there's a fledgling park project here that could satisfy this need pretty easily, at least on paper, but we just have to work through the technicalities of the rules and whatnot on that. But like I said, OPRD is meeting with NPS this week, and that's a really important meeting for this process, because and I told them, we need to have some actionable feedback on this issue so we can move it forward after you meet. So I'm counting on that happening here in the next few weeks, where we can sit down with them and really chart out a path forward on this, because the ball's been in their court for some time now. Yes.
Go back to the Scenic Act compliance. The bridge, the current bridge is explicitly referenced in the Scenic Act as a key viewing area. Who has to work through that issue? Is the new bridge going to become the scenic viewing area that replaces the old one in terms of compliance with the Scenic Act? And was it, and I was also wondering, even the bridge itself is the key viewing area. So how does the visual subordination requirement apply to something that is the viewing area? Because I-84 is a viewing area. When they make a change in I-84, they don't have to make I-84 look nice so that it looks nice from elsewhere. How does that all work?
Well, my understanding is that the new bridge will be that new key viewing area, and that there's viewing from the bridge itself, but there's also the aesthetics of seeing the bridge and having it blend into the background of the gorge. And that's where I really think the requirements for the bridge management plan are articulating what's required for the bridge. So again, I mentioned the aesthetics committee. We're getting people in the room that know this stuff to help. Basically, our goal is to have the aesthetics committee convening and starting their process before the progressive design build contractors on board, late Q1 of next year, so that by the time they're ready to start talking about fascia aesthetic treatments, which is, further down in the design process, this has all been handled. And we're going to be doing this lockstep with the Gorge Commission because they ultimately hold the keys of this approval, even though a lot of that authority gets relegated out to, in some cases, the Forest Service, or some cases, the local jurisdictions here. But that's the plan.
So when you talk about aesthetics, really the language is visual subordination. And is that what you mean by aesthetics?
I mean that visual subordination, which I guess in more layman's terms means it needs to blend in. You don't want the most aesthetically pleasing bridge in the Columbia River Scenic Gorge should be a bridge you can't see, is how I've had somebody explain it to me. So there's that. So it is the visual subordination. Yeah. Okay, next slide, please. We're getting close. Let's see. So now moving to the state of Washington regulatory requirements. The first one here is the Washington State Environmental Policy Act. As you're probably aware, Washington has its own SEPA, much like NEPA. Some good news we received on this fairly recently was we've been really pushing WSDOT and Ecology to get together and determine who the lead SEPA agency will be, because when the NEPA process started, with the port being the entity pushing for the project, being an Oregon organization, they can't be the lead SEPA agency because we're talking about Washington. So between some back and forth, and it got elevated to the higher ups at WSDOT and Ecology. I think about a month ago, my contact at Ecology told me that WSDOT has taken on the lead SEPA agency role. They also have in their SEPA rules, they have a means and methods for adopting an existing NEPA EIS to satisfy SEPA. So moving forward, it looks like we're not going to have a need for a detailed SEPA analysis for the project, which actually takes a pretty thorough and detailed regulatory process off the books for us. So that's a good news. We thought we could go this way. It wasn't really a given until we started really talking to the right people. And right now it's looking like we will not have to go through SEPA review.
So question for you, how do you document that decision's been made? So you don't go down 3 months and then all of a sudden Oregon now wants to take the lead in it?
Great question. We will get that documented. This has been through right now through email exchanges and phone calls. But we will get that codified so that we can go back to it and have a firm ground to stand on. Yep. In Washington, in-water work requires a hydraulic project approval. And this regulates in-water work impacts on sensitive species issued by the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. The Department of Ecology implements Clean Water Act Section 401 water quality certifications. And you'll see when I get into the Oregon slide, there's a lot of the same requirements. We just have to do it over in Oregon with a different agency. It's just part of that, again, the bi-state nature of this project. And that regulates in-water work and nearshore work for water quality issues. Again, Ecology is going to be the provider of that permit. Ecology will also provide the construction stormwater general permit, which is more focused on construction and how the contractors, BMPs, and other conservation measures will not lead to contamination of aquatic bodies. And as John was pointing out, and did a good job of, the Department of Natural Resources will require a long-term lease agreement for the new bridge. And one thing they've mentioned too is that other Washington permits have to be in place or issued before they can sign off on their lease agreement. But that doesn't mean we'll certainly be working these in parallel. So it's just a matter of making sure those other permits are in place, and then we can go to DNR and say we're ready. Next slide, please. On the Oregon side, Oregon has the removal fill law, which is administered by the Department of State Lands. This is basically regulates impacts of waters of the state. So much like the Clean Water Act 404 process, Oregon has their own state process. They also implement Clean Water Act Section 401. DEQ does that, Department of Environmental Quality. Basically the same issues for the Washington side. We just have to do it in Oregon. Different processes for applying for it, but it's very similar in nature. Oregon also has a fish passage law that the project will have to demonstrate compliance with, and that's administered by ODF and W. And, you know, this is a big crossing, fish passage. You might think, why would we even need to be thinking about fish passage? This really gets into construction and work trestles, work bridges, platforms, and the rule of thumb, this is not an ORS or anywhere in Oregon law, and doing a lot of projects, working them through Oregon's fish passage law, that the rule of thumb is as long as you have at least one unobstructed 35-foot span through your construction footprint, that's good enough for meeting the fish patches law. So not a hard bar to hit, but we just have to be mindful of it. 1200C stormwater general permits, much like the construction stormwater permit that Department of Ecology on the Washington side administers. Again, Oregon DEQ does it on the Oregon side. And then the DSL will require two separate easements for a state lands waterway easement. They have confirmed that the new bridge will have to have its own easement, and then the removal of the existing bridge will be a separate easement. Next slide, please. So on the local side, City of Hood River, you know, as probably would be expected of a project of this magnitude, this project is woven into transportation plans, comprehensive plans. It's certainly all the local agencies are very supportive of the project. So, you know, in terms of just the land use review for this project, we're looking at a site plan review and development permit application for City of Hood River. More or less the same thing, per the specific nuances of the code on the white salmon side. But based on how Washington state law is structured, there is a little more regulatory authority. I guess you could say that City of White Salmon has implementation of their critical areas ordinance. There are some critical areas that have been flagged down on the north side of the bridge landing. And also the statewide Shoreline Management Act. The project will need a shoreline substantial development conditional use permit from the city. As John's actually having his presentation before mine really helped kind of lay out some of the ownership items that I'm kind of talking about here more briefly. But as John showed, Klickitat County's jurisdiction does extend out into the river. So we're anticipating the need for a floodplain development permit from the county. And then last but definitely not least, BNSF, of course, has their rail line going right through our project. And they have a pretty dense manual for what they need to approve projects that interact or come near their jurisdiction. And basically they want to look at operational plans, construction plans, and ultimately that'll end up with a signed agreement between the railroad and the bridge authority to make sure everybody's on the same page on how operations are going to work effectively in the future. So that's the end of my presentation. Next slide, please, Kelly. I've got my contact information here in case anybody would like to reach out to me directly and discuss specific things that I did or didn't go over today. We're almost at time, but if anybody has any additional questions, I'd be happy to field them.
Hey, Stuart, great job. Thank you for taking us through that process. Question, was there any sort of environmental justice initiatives or knowing the NEPA process and knowing the environmental justice and the tribes that we're working with, I'm just wondering, is there any potential funding opportunities that we could give back to the tribes because the fact that we are going into, fishing rights and that kind of thing, and knowing the Justice 40 program with the Army Corps of Engineers, was there any sort of initiatives or reaching out to the Army Corps to see if there was any sort of Justice 40 that they could give us some funding for this project?
Not that I'm aware of specifically with the Corps and the tribes being the recipient, as you laid out. One or two of the bullets that I had in public engagement and whatnot came out of the EGA process through NEPA. My understanding and review of the NEPA document is that the EGA processes are really focused on local communities and impacting, movement, businesses, those types of things. But Mike can probably articulate this a little better than I can, but we have through those tribal fishing MOAs and some of the other things that are ongoing as we work to close NEPA, we're talking, everything's on the table in terms of mitigating those impacts. So we've talked about workforce development. We've talked about financial compensation. We've talked about all kinds of different things. So, but specifically to your question, I'm not aware of anything through the Corps EG program that's been applied.
Comment or question for you. It seems like when I listen to you, you're doing a great job, by the way. But it looks like what we've got is we've got two projects here. We got a project on the Washington side and we got a project on the Oregon side. And we're kind of losing sight. We've got one project And it drives me nuts when we have the same permit issue, but we have to have two different forms to be able to meet that. Have you thought through anything about trying to get on top of that and bring some efficiency to the effort?
It's a great point, Commissioner Fox. It does feel like the regulatory requirements are duplicated, right? You're doing the same thing. I mean, even on my two state slides, we have the same names of the permits, right? Just different authorizing agencies. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the information and due diligence and materials that'll go into a lot of those permits that are very similar, we won't have to do it twice. So in other words, it's just, if anything, it's a coordination issue, right? What the product that we prepare is this, but then we have to take it and go this way, right? So that's just all about, I think, dealing with that issue is just all about making sure we have good partnerships with our regulatory agencies, meeting with them often, letting them know what's coming, letting the progressive design build contractor make sure they understand the complexities of the permitting on this project, because they're going to be driving that bus for the most part. We're going to be sitting we're going to be front seat driving them, but that's an important part of the selection of the progressive design build contractor, I think, is an understanding of these nuances and how it all needs to come together. Some of the requirements, the federal law requiring the requirements for, say, 401C are the same. It's all handed down to each state and they run with it. But DEQ has a very different way you apply than ecology does. And it's just the turfiness of, I guess, of jurisdictions, and people like to do it the way they like to do it. And as they should. But I hear what you're saying. We're going to minimize duplication. Like I said, a lot of for instance, on the Oregon side, to get a removal fill permit and a 404 permit from the Corps, use the same application. So there are efficiencies there that the agencies have actually woven into the process. So we'll leverage those as best we can. And at the end of the day, making sure that the progressive design build contractor really understands what's ahead of them and what the schedule is and what's needed to get done by these certain milestones.
Just on that issue, at the end of the day, the jurisdictions don't have the ability to pass off to another jurisdiction their responsibility. So Hood River County can say, we didn't let Klickitat County process this.
No, I
Just don't have that
understand that.
ability. Yeah.
Well, I was kind of going with this, and you mentioned it. If the data is the same, if you can electronically reformat it for this one, reformat it for that one, but they're the same, you're not regenerating it, if you will. It's not quite as good as having one, but it's not quite as bad as having full two.
And I thought I wasn't going to go down the wormhole, but I will 1 second, just as an example for the Washington side. And I assume most, if not a few of you, probably are familiar with permitting projects here in Washington, but they have a form called the JARPA, which is a streamlined permit application. And in Washington, your JARPA can get you up to 5 permits with one application. So there are some built-in efficiencies and streamlining that the agencies have over the years have worked towards that we'll leverage. I mean, you have to use their format anyway. So I guess I want to just drive home the point that the process itself has gotten more efficient than it was, say, 20 or 25 years ago, thankfully.
All the ones that you talked about, which are the ones that got you most concerned?
That's a great question. The 6F one, honestly, it just feels kind of amorphous in terms of some of the feedback we're getting. And that's not knowing specifically what the requirement is for the project in terms of the conversion now is something that I want us to get on top of quickly. So that's one. And I think we share that. We've had meetings before on this and you've expressed that to me too. I mentioned the bridge permit, and that's just because that's the final permit that's needed. And you've probably heard on some other big projects in the area, the bridge permit has been a hang up for some other large interstate bridge projects. Not necessarily because of the project's fault, just various things happen. So those two are ones that I have mentally flagged as, potentially more challenging than some of the others.
So what I'd be challenging you to do on those that you have the most concern about, putting together a little mini schedule and an attack approach to not let it get out of hand. So really go proactive in front of it. And when you need help, you're talking to us about what help can we give you?
Yes.
Stuart, I asked her to put the slide up on here. Is this proprietary to your company or does the authority own this slide right now? You created,
It's not proprietary.
the reason I'm asking, I'm just wondering because this is a pretty intense slide that shows the timelines and the main amazingness that needs to happen in order to keep this on schedule. And I'm just wondering if it might be beneficial to the RFP committee to have this be released with the RFP, because it shows again what we're up to, how quickly it will be. And you also then can mark similar, you can actually kind of show that these are the permits that kind of look alike. Again, someone who's I'm a little bit more familiar with NEPA processing, and I just think this is a brilliant way to show the owner what actually is required to get through all this. And I just think that we would be missing out if we were not having access to this in our own internal dialogue, just because it's very, I mean, you miss one permit, you forget about one permit, you can kind of, not you, I'm saying like not you, obviously, but the next person who's gonna take over 1A, 1B, and this would ruin the whole project, seeing it from our side.
What this shows, be careful what you think it shows. It shows a whole list of permits. It doesn't really say all of the steps that have to take place to get that permit. That's where the meat and potatoes is. So this is a good starting point, but I agree with you. We gotta figure out how close to the critical path are we, and hopefully they're not all equal. And then we start knocking them off as soon as we can.
Any other questions, thoughts, concerns online? I know I know from my perspective, seeing the SEPA being under the NEPA. I'm not always seeing that in Washington with large projects, and that to me is a major concern. If ecology decides they want to do their own EIS for their that's a 2-year process, and that'll set the whole project back. So the sooner we can get those answers and get that, as Mike said, get that on paper and written down, the far better off we're going to be, because that's a long list. With that, thank you very much, sir. Is there anything from any of the commissioners as a roundtable? I know we're already past time. Okay, our next meeting will be Monday, October 23rd, 2023, from 2 to 4. Likely here, maybe in our office. We'll find out. If there's anything else for the good of the order. I'm not seeing anything with that. With the consent of anyone else, I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you all. Have a great night.